What is up, guys? You got NotTheWorst here, bringing another Black Desert online video, and today we are revisiting a endgame PvE guide. We are looking at Awakening Drakania. I last touched on this when the class was first released back in August, September-ish of 2022. She did get some changes. She's had a couple of skills added, some skills tweaked, the speed between some of her skills linking, and some damage adjustments in her PvE. Most of this occurred in early January, so she has definitely got a little bit better kit, or at least a little bit better results out of her kit with some of the changes that were implemented. And since we now have a tag event, I was able to tag back to Drakania to try her out and get an updated guide out for you. So overall, she's a pretty decent PvE class. She does perform really well at some spots and a little bit under what you'd want, especially if you're comparing to really high-end grinding classes like Megu, Wusa, things like that. She's going to fall off quite a bit in some specific areas. When we're talking endgame grind for this type of grind and skill rotation and things that we're using, we're really talking like Gyfin Underground Plus, so like Hex, Trolls, that sort of thing for it. She does shine at Gyfin Underground specifically, although most classes nowadays can perform pretty similarly at that spot specifically. And she's also really good at Trolls as well. A lot of this has to do with the interaction of how her damage is assigned, a lot of her things being in front of her. She does have some decent AoE around her, but when you compare to something like Megu, which is just a massive AoE range, that class really shines at a spot like Hex, where you'll see Drakania not quite keep up with some of the other classes in that regard because of where the actual damage is dealt on it. Those mobs in particular, as you'll see in the demo, they need to be grouped really well for her, and you have to kind of position directly in front, so you'll see a lot of movement to make sure that's facilitated, and getting back attacks on things constantly, like her Dragon Blood Sundering Roar. Obviously, that's a very long animation skill. It's a kind of a spiral thing directly in front of her, and it goes out pretty far, but if you have those mobs kind of spread out in more of an AoE, like circular area, she kind of misses out on some damage opportunity there, which is where you may see it fall off. So she does perform really well. If you're adequate with her, she can do above average numbers in general for it. Just wanted to note that Hex specifically, you'll see her not quite keeping pace with some of the other classes like she can at, say, Gyfin or Trolls. So with that piece covered, let's go ahead and get jumped into taking a look at our Lightstone sets. Okay, so talking about Lightstone sets for Awakened Drakania, you really have two feasible options that are going to mostly outshine other options, and then, of course, you can come up with something else if you don't have the stones for these. Her actual best in slot is going to be Death Blow. This is going to increase your critical hit chance by a bit, so that some of her skills that don't reach max crit, even when fully buffed, are actually going to be able to. You'll see in a lot of cases very important skills, usually out of the Hexblood kit, are going to only hit 87% critical hit rate, and that is not good because we want to pack on as much extra critical hit damage, and if we're missing criticals 13% of the time, your DPS actually falls off very drastically for that. This is one of those classes that really wants Death Blow for her kit. The performance difference is pretty noticeable. The exception being maybe at Gyfin, because you're kind of like 100% back attack on that, and you can use what our secondary option here would be if you were doing something like that, or maybe use another class that doesn't use Death Blow or benefit as much off of Death Blow, so you don't want to invest into the blades. And the other option is going to be Vicious Shadows. This is going to give us increased critical hit damage 6% and back attack damage as well added on top of that. These do tend to sort of keep up with Death Blow at Gyfin specifically. You will see it kind of pale in comparison at a spot like Hex, where you're not getting 90% plus back attacks, more like 50%, and that's probably being a little bit generous. So this set does fall off a bit. It's an all-around great set. The damage is really nice on it. The stats, obviously, critical hit damage and back attack damage being added on to just some flat-out AP gains for monsters in general. It's nothing to scoff at in that regard, but it does end up just falling a little bit short of what you'd want to see in some cases for it. So either one of those two sets is going to be really strong. I would lean you towards Death Blow. Something to keep in mind. It can be pretty difficult to get, and if this is a class you're just trying out and you're not really maining it, or it's just kind of a tag or whatever, depending on where you're at in gear, it might not make a lot of sense to pick up a Death Blow set. And like I said, Vicious Shadows is fairly close competitor for this class with it. The problem is you need 2 blade stones for that, and Vicious Shadows, the only really expensive piece you need is Strike. So it may be different on your server, but on NA servers, both blades and strikes stay sold out at all times with a lot of pre-orders on them, so they're at max pre-order at 5 billion silver each. So if you need 2 blades, you're going to have have to, one, roll the dice and win 2 pre-orders to get yourself 2 blades, and 2, it's going to cost you 10 billion silver. So you really need to pay attention. Is this a class you want to use, and does my gear make sense that I need to be putting in 10 billion silver worth of pre-orders on blades right now, or maybe that's something you can hold off to. Strike, the same scenario. You need strike and shadows are the 2 you need to kind of pick up for this. Shadows is pretty easy to get. I think it's 100 to 200 mil, something like that, and they do sit on the marketplace, so no big deal on that one. But the other one, the strike stone, same thing as the blades. So you'll need to put a pre-order on 1 to get 5 billion silver order filled. Again, just cross your fingers that you win that pre-order. If you don't have those, or you just want to try out the class a bit, so obviously committing to those isn't something you want to do. Number 1, you can commit to Vicious Shadows because every single class in the game can definitely use it functionally. And 2, you're not going to hate yourself committing to Deathblow because there are a lot of classes where Deathblow outperforms Vicious Shadows. Not all. That's not always the case. Some classes do have access to their PvE rotation just being 100% critical hit rate, but for those that don't, Deathblow tends to outweigh it. Again, your mileage may vary on the spot that you're grinding. If you don't have options like that, you could run something like the Wilds for the spot that you're grinding. Again, when we talk about Trolls or Gyphon Underground, we have a species subtype for these. So if you're Gyphon Underground, you can get a Commissylvia monster damage added on for the Wilds, and that's going to be pretty decent. Or if you're at Trolls, you can do the same thing for Demi-Human. At Hex, you actually can't do that since they are animal or beast subtype, which doesn't have an additional subtype damage. I don't really recommend the Wilds just flat AP setup. So you can look at some of the other options like Trained Fists or some of the other arrangements where you're just getting like some accuracy, some flat AP, things that matter. Hex and Trolls have some pretty high requirements for hit rate, so maybe that accuracy is going to help you out. I would also caution you to make sure you're paying attention to what artifacts you're using for this, because maintaining that 100% hit rate is going to be really important, but also specifically Trolls and Hex, the AP cap there being 5%, it's going to be extremely restrictive capping, putting on more AP than past that cap. 898 for Hex and I believe 920 for Trolls. So going past that total AP amount doesn't really make any sense. So make sure you've got it calced out with what artifacts you're running, because a lot of times people are just going to run those extra AP against monsters in all of their sets, but that might not be the smart move at a spot like Hex. If you have high AP already and you're actually not doing anything with it, you could maybe put that in towards accuracy or even HP or something else defensive that might help keep you alive if you're being kind of lazy, not paying attention. If you are at Gyphon Underground, you have a 70% AP cap, so stacking more AP actually does make sense and can get you some more damage that way. So anyway, there you have it. Those are the 2 sets I definitely recommend. If you don't have those, any of the other options are a pretty decent way to go. So with that covered, let's go ahead and get started talking about crystals. All right, so moving into crystals, I've got 2 sets we're going to take a look at. And as I mentioned in the Lightstone segment, you kind of do need to be calculating out what your total AP is for grinding these endgame grind zones because of those AP caps. The LV of 5% restriction is going to kind of dictate what you want to run. If you're at Gyphon and you just want kind of a general PvE you can use, so we'll run with this one, general PvE, I've got it labeled. This setup will kind of just work for all around or grinding anywhere. Or if you don't care about if you're going over AP cap and you just want to give it a run and try something out, you can pretty much use this anywhere. It's just not necessarily capitalizing on all the options that you could be running for different grind zones. But this gives us, of course, accuracy with our Elcars and Vipers, which is pretty standard there. We run Valor so that we can get a little bit extra AP as needed there, as well as the critical hit rate, so that your buffs are set around getting max crit. With it, we're running the Alcrads and the Olicus. Yes, the Olicus has human damage on it, but we want that for the attack speed because, we don't really have anything that's going to add additional damage after we have those corrupted and rebellious spirit crystals in there, which are both incredibly strong. So we might as well pick up some extra attack speed. Obviously, attacking faster means your DPS is higher, so it's not all about just smashing a bunch of AP into your crystals and running with that. These do make a lot of sense, and you can actually notice a bit of a difference when you use that. Is it going to pull massive amount of trash more just running 2 more Olicus? No, of course not. And can they be replaced with something else you like better? Yes, absolutely. And talking about replacing with something better, let's take a look at the other set, our AP cap set. So this is more geared towards something I'm running like at Hex or Trolls. The situation here is that with my gear AP already up there, I'm going to greatly exceed, especially Hex, the 898 AP cap, and we don't want more AP beyond that because it's not going to actually do any more damage for us, it's restricted at 5% again. That means every 10 AP is only worth an actuality of 0.5 AP. So if you have 100 additional AP over the cap, it would only functionally be 5 AP. So stacking it doesn't make any sense. We want to look into other things that can be beneficial. So in this case, I'm running Hooms to get some extra HP. You can reach 7,000 HP with your gear fairly up there, and a set of crystals running with this. You can see we dropped the Olicus in favor of that defensive gain, running a full set of Hooms here, and we and then we get that defensive pickup, which definitely helps out at Hex if we're not paying attention, and there's maybe a skeleton that blows up while we're, I don't know, watching a Hex Marie or something, or we're just not fully on top of it. Then we can go ahead and survive even in that scenario, because we have 7,000 HP off of the Hooms, which helps out a little bit. We dropped the Crystal of Elcars because they were unnecessary in this scenario to run in order to hit max hit rate. Obviously, we don't need to be above 100% hit rate with all of our PvE skills, or else we are just wasting that slot. This may not necessarily work for you. This is going to be more so if your gear is pretty up there, although the requirement to get into Hex and Trolls is up there already. So you could do something like this and just in favor of the accuracy and additional AP that don't really have any function, go out for some more defensive options just so we can play it safe, or honestly play it a little more lazy and not worry about just getting dead out of nowhere while we're grinding. Again, you can mix and match this for whatever it is you like. Just calc out what your hit rate is, calc out your max AP, make sure you're sticking around that 898 total AP number, and then you can build your crystals around it. Maybe just use this as kind of a guideline for what you want to start with, and then kind of tweak it as you go from there. Just make sure that hit rate is 100%. You're not dropping too much accuracy so that you're not hitting it. So now that we've got that covered, let's go ahead and get into skill add-ons. Okay, so for skill add-ons, before we dive into these, as always, I want to point out that your skill add-ons should coincide with how your skill rotation operates. I know I mentioned this in every PvE guide that I do, but it's really important to base that on it, because if you're like me and you're looking at somebody else's guide and trying to just get an outline for how to run the class, and then kind of make it your own, that definitely makes a lot of sense to do in that scenario. But what I don't recommend doing is running your own skill rotation and then taking these skill add-ons, or vice versa, running the skill rotation we're going to run and then using your own skill add-ons. That's kind of silly, because you might end up with some redundancy in the add-ons. Maybe the skills are overlapping because you're using one right after the other. So skill add-ons should definitely run with skill rotation. So keep that mindful as you are progressing playing this class. With it, if you make some changes in the skill rotation because you think it suits you better, or maybe your ping or your FPS can pull off some other things that we can't, whatever the case may be, just make sure you're aware of that and then make adjustments so that your skill add-ons actually make sense to what your skill rotation is. So with that said, let's just run down the list and talk about a few points on that. Actually, rather than running down the list, I'll point out a few things. So we have a couple of tier 3 add-ons that are pretty heavy hitters. And when we get to the skill rotation, you'll see we're actually leading with these in 90% of cases. And I'll explain that in the skill rotation section. But our tier 3 add-ons are Doombringer and the Dragonblood version of Sundering Roar. So your most important in any PvE skill rotation in most cases are going to be your extra AP against monsters, your attack casting speed, and then your critical hit rate, because we want to be hitting a 100% critical hit rate. Dragonblood has the benefit of virtually every skill being 100% critical hit rate. So as you can see, that's not something we're going to worry about here until we get into some of the Hexblood skills, which are lower in the skill rotation, to make sure that they're going to hit critical hit rate maximum. So we put in the extra 30 AP against monsters. Caveat on that, if you could be in a position where you're set up to where you're hitting max AP in an LV zone. If you're grinding Trolls or Hex, this doesn't apply to Gyphon, since the 70% AP cap isn't nearly as restrictive. You might have a setup where you don't actually need that extra damage against monsters 30 plus 30. Maybe you're already hitting the cap without it. If you are, you can totally slot something else in there. If you want to put in an accuracy rate on there, maybe an evasion shred or something early on, you definitely can do that. I've seen other people actually run like movement speed increase, just because pack to pack movement is definitely a thing at like Hex, for instance, not so much Trolls. So you can be flexible with that if you find that you don't need that. Personally, I like the idea of running different crystals or using different artifacts and picking up other options there than I do getting rid of the skill add-on for the monster damage. I'd rather just use that 30 there. The Drakania has a very easy time hitting the cap compared to most, because her two stances, in Awakening, she's gonna have 20 or 25 plus AP just passively. So yeah, it makes it really, really easy to hit cap the whole time. So yeah, not a huge deal there. If you don't run the 30, you could stick an extra monster plus 20 on something else if you wanted to. As far as the Dragonblood skills go, then we also have Savage Decree, where we are putting that accuracy rate on there just so that we get in our first few initial skills, make sure we got our max hit rate running through. everything. And then we have a DP minus 15 on that. That's because the skill itself also has a minus 20 DP. So we're just going to land that before we pop off our big Sundering Roar so that we have a minus 35 DP on the opposing monsters and hit as hard as we possibly can. That Sundering Roar's got back attack and critical hit damage. And you'll see when we get into skill rotation and into the demo, we want to position so that we're hitting that skill for the most damage possible, because it's a lot of damage and it goes on for a long time. So we have a lot of hits being applied on it. So they'll each tick of that hit, you'll get that skill add-on benefit on there. So we're just looking for ways to maximize that. After that, then we get into Hexblood skills. So you can see there we've got that critical hit rate plus 20%. When we're running Death Blow, that's going to still get us 100% hit rate on Stormmaul to hit the maximum there, even on that 20%. If you don't have that set up, or maybe you're not running Death Blow, you could definitely look at potentially changing out back attack or critical hit damage, probably back attack before crit. You could change that out for a critical hit plus 30% if you're not running Death Blow. In fact, I highly recommend doing that option. Remove some of the damage, put the 30% critical hit rate on Sundering Roar, so that way you are getting an extra 10% hit rate and you can run Vicious Shadows in that scenario. You'll still be shy a few percentage for a maximum crit, and it's also not going to last the full rotation for it, but it'll be really close to it, and it's definitely something you can get away with if you happen to already have Vicious Shadows and don't want to invest in the Death Blow, or at least not right now. Then other things are just kind of where we can have them on there. Spiteful Soul's got an evasion shred. It's got pretty good coverage, frontal anyways, as far as hitting a lot of mobs. Something that's a little bit unique with the minus DP and the minus evasions, any debuffs on mobs, you have to hit all of the mobs for that to apply, whereas an accuracy rate plus 4%, you don't. If you hit one mob, you'll have that extra 4% hit rate no matter what, but if you're not hitting all the mobs that you're attacking with that evasion shred, then you're not going to have another 4% on the ones that don't get hit by it. So we just stick it in there. To be honest with you, in the setup I'm running with my gear, that 4% is irrelevant on it. I'll have max hit rate anyhow, but it's not a terrible thing to have for when you get Rift Boss spawns, because they have actually a higher evasion rate than the regular mobs at Hex, and that does end up mattering, so that I have 100% hit rate on all mobs with that evasion shred, including the bosses. I don't need it outside the bosses. Then we just have on here Extinction. It's got the extra AP against monsters, and that is because this one's not going to last. Our full rotation runs about 12-ish seconds, depending on E's and Z buffs and that sort of thing. It's ballpark 12 seconds on it, so this isn't going to last the whole length. It's going to run a little bit dry. So we do that so that we can make sure that we get, it's 12 seconds. It's 15 to 16 seconds. And it depends on how many times you need to reposition for your back attacks, which is often. So when you actually have the back attacks, it comes out to exactly 17 with a couple of movement skills. But again, we'll get into that later. You want to have another one of these extra APs somewhere sticking in there if you need the AP again, if you're in a situation where you don't, because you have you're at an Elvia zone. With that cap, you don't need it, then you can fill in something else on there, potentially maybe another DP shred or something. If you want to do that, kind of up to you. Just, again, make sure that it's going to fit in with your skill rotation so that it makes sense. And with that said, we're going to go into the skill rotation to put this all together and take a look. Okay, so let's talk about our skill rotation. I'm going to go ahead and pull up two different windows here on the screen for that rotation. This will cover the key inputs on PC if you just want to look at those. The skill names will be on the left-hand side there, and both of them have the actual images of the skill, so that if you're new to the class and not familiar with what's what, you can kind of get familiar with what the symbol looks like for the actual skill. Dragon Blood ones are in blue, and Hexblood are in orange and red with it, so you'll see that in the Awakening tree corresponding to that. So yeah, you'll get familiar with them pretty quickly for this class, unlike a class like Megu, where everything's like red and all of the icons actually kind of look the same. These ones you can kind of make sense of pretty easily, and it's not too much trouble like Megu. So something else I'll point out before we start going through the actual skill inputs here. We start at the top and then run through. This rotation is indeed designed so that you can rinse and repeat and just go through it as needed in there. You may find that depending on, especially like crystal setup, if you're running like Alucus crystals, or your attack speed is a bit higher than normal, or your FPS is through the roof, something along those lines, you might find when you're E or Z buffing that your Sundering Roar is going to be a little bit need an extra second or two to get off cooldown when that E and Z is up. is up. If that is the case, you can add in right before you hit that Sundering Roar, Shift RMB in it, which is Spiteful Soul out of Dragonblood. We just did it in Hex there. But out of Dragonblood when you're going in that rotation, you can add that in, or even just 1 or 2 hits of it and just kind of save you that extra second. It doesn't come up super often. It's not too much of a problem for me when I run around 144 FPS most of the time, so I don't personally worry about it, but I am aware that it could be the case, for guys running like 200-300 FPS when you have that attack speed buff on. So just want to point that out. And the second thing I wanted to point out is I actually run this starting with the Hexblood portion and the top to bottom, and then go to the Dragonblood portion when I'm at Gyphon Underground specifically. Why? Because the reason for that is obviously we're dealing mass amounts of damage in our Dragonblood building up to that Sundering Roar hit. If we started with that at Gyphon, because they have that wake up animation where they take barely any damage, we would be dumping all of our high damage skills that are all 100% critical hit rate with all our critical hit damage stacked on top. We'd be throwing that into the wake up portion of them when they're just kind of getting set up and you can't really attack them. And by doing that, you actually make your time to kill longer. So that's a little bit silly. You could also just aggro it and stand there and wait until they fully wake up and remove. They get a little icon at the top, a little shield icon. You could wait until that's removed and then start the rotation in from the top and then go to the bottom. But why not apply a few debuffs and a couple of add-on buffs going through the Hexblood while you're just standing there anyways, and get a little bit of chip damage in while they're in that defensive wake-up position. So just pointing that out. If you are at other spots, Hex or Trolls, you're going to go straight from top to bottom and not really worry about any wake-up animations so much. So first thing we lead off with is going to be Doombreaker. This is Shift Q. A couple things with this. One, it'll switch you into Dragonblood if you're not already. Maybe you just moved over to a mob or something, so you used another skill that, we had BSR on there. You used another skill that got you over to the mob, and so you're in Hexblood for it. Well, this is going to put you right back into Dragonblood to get us started for a combo. It's also a tier 3 add-on, so it gives us those buffs we were talking about, get our attack speed and monster damage up right away. So after we get the Doombreaker in, we are going to use Tip of the Scale real quick, and it's just 1 hit, as you see we do there. We're just going to do the 1 hit with Tip of the Scale. Using it right after Doombreaker gives us a cancel on the first kind of startup animations of it. It's a nice little movement on top of it, so it flows very nicely, and then it gets us into our next one, which is Savage Decree. It's going to be a SL and B, and that one's also going to be canceled a little bit quick when you do them in succession of each other. So Doombringer, Tip of the Scale, and then Savage Decree. Just that 1 hit of Savage Decree there. You can see the little dragon's head kind of pops out right when he does it, instead of doing the full animation for it. This gives us our DP debuff, so we've kind of built up all of our... One, we're dealing great damage in Dragonblood no matter what we're doing, but instead of doing the full thing, we just get that dragon head on there. We've got both our DP debuffs, and now we have our Sundering Roar set up to just absolutely delete the stuff that's in front of us. Typically, you'll need to reposition here, make sure you have a back attack, and then if you do it immediately after a Dragon Walk, you can go backwards with it, which you'll see in the demo video quite a bit. You can go backwards, you can go sideways or whatever, and if you hit SF on PC right after that, then you don't have the startup animation of that Sundering Roar, as you saw when I did it there. If you miss the key, or you don't, or you're just standing directly, and you'll end up doing the entire animation, which is slow. See how she, well, we actually canceled there. She'll stick her dragon head thing up in the air and then do it. It's slower. It doesn't make any sense to do it. We're not dealing extra damage that way. You want to get either a movement skill or do it directly coming off of your Savage Decree so that she does it instantly. From there, one of the new skills that were added since she first came out is Aerial Burst. We used to have a hotkey for her flow. That's no longer necessary, as the flow is a cooldown directly tied to your Sundering Roar, so you don't have to worry about that. She'll do it automatically. No extra items necessary there. It'll do the Storm Piercer for you. So we're going to hotkey the new skill, Aerial Burst. It's nice, good damage. It's one of her AoEs that does kind of hit everything. It's just good extra damage to put in between. So then we're going to start getting into our Hexblood skills, starting off with Obliterate coming right off that Aerial Burst. So those two do flow pretty nicely together as far as they go. So we can do that Aerial Burst and then right into that Obliterate. So those move pretty good. It's a really nice follow-up skill. It gets us swapped over into our Hexblood state with it. That skill was changed quite a bit from her initial release, and it's in a really good state now. I believe I used to lock it when she originally came out, but that's no longer the case. Then we're going to Storm Maul directly after. It's iframe into decent damage. From there, it's also got our skill add-ons for critical hit to make sure we're maxing out our Hexblood skills. It does have collision on it, so if you make sure the mobs are in front of you there, so you're not just iframing away from them when you have them in there. So then we're going to go into Extinction. And Extinction we don't want to do directly after Storm Maul. We want to reposition here. Why? Because It's really slow. If you do that, it has a little bit of a wind up on the animation if you go straight into it. So it's a really good opportunity to get behind them and then go ahead and hit your extinction. That way it's just a direct hit. It gets on them, but it also kind of flows together. So you're keeping those back attacks like we talked about earlier. And then it also sets up just an additional 1 hit. We're going to go ahead and give them just the tip right after that. So we'll reposition extinction, and then I'm going to put in just the tip. When you hit them with that one, it gives just that last hit of it. So kind of similar to what we were doing in the Dragonblood version with it, the Savage Decree. We were hitting just that individual one rather than doing the full couple of hits there. It's got 4 out of it. We're going to get just the third one that's going to put you directly on top of the mobs and give them just the tip. After that, we're going to Tectonic Slam. Which this one is this one you can't really mess up for it. It's WE, and it's got BSR on it as well. WE if you're on PC, that is. It's got BSR on it as well. That one, there's no canceling, there's no anything like that. It's a fast skill, really good damage. The BSR is very useful. I know not all classes have that. So pretty good skill to just throw in there. And then I typically reposition from this point and then finish with Spiteful Soul into Sundering Roar. And the Spiteful Soul, you can see we've got Frontal Guard set up on that, and then it has a flow that goes with it, which doesn't have frontal guard. So keep that in mind. That's also one of the reasons I like to reposition behind the mobs again there, especially at Hex where you might have a couple of elites spawned. If you're moving through pretty quickly and spawning pink orbs off the soul harvesters, you don't want to be face tanking that piece because they can actually hit pretty hard. So once you get that flow, then you switch into Sundering Roar. I personally put Super Armor on the Sundering Roar, again, for the same reasons, just keeps me protected while I'm dishing out a lot of damage. And Hexblood Sundering Roar is actually a massive amount of damage, especially when you're getting the back attacks. So that is pretty important to make sure that you land. So there you have each one kind of explained. Let me go ahead and go through the skill rotations and see what it all looks like put together. There you have it, and then we are back to Doombringer, and you can see we have no problems with our Sundering Roar cooldown coming off because we're not E or Z buffed. And typically you won't, like I said, only going to be an issue with like very high FPS when you are E or Z buffed. Without it, it's completely seamless, no issues. Yep, so you can just rinse and repeat. It goes all the way down, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And does really nice damage. Like I said, you'll see Hex is going to be a little bit of a different animal for this. Obviously, we're flipping all over the place because we don't have mobs here for the collision, but you can check it out, the demo portion for this as well, where you can see me actually doing mobs. I have some Hex clips and then also Gyphon just to kind of give you an idea of what I was talking about with that wake up animation and using the Hex Blood kit to start with. So I do have a few examples of that in the demo portion as well if you want to check that out and kind of see what it looks like. Just be aware because of my AP and the requirements for Gyphon, I don't get very far all the way through it. I'm just doing the Hex Blood portion on Wake Up, and they're going to die on Sundering Roar before I get anywhere back to Hex Blood skills or even Aerial Burst. I usually do that if I just need to clean up mobs at Gyphon, so that may not be the case for you. Maybe you do need to cycle through it. It's all just going to depend on your setup and your total gear, of course, so your mileage may vary there. Just want you to be aware of that. And that's going to be it. So check out the demo if you want to see it in action on some mobs. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to like it. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you get notifications when new videos go live. And if you'd like to catch me playing live, there's a link to my Twitch page in the description down below. You can jump on over there, drop a follow so you get notifications for that as well. With that said, that's going to be it for this one. I want to thank everybody for watching, and I will see you next time.